evening, everybody, and welcome to this live learning event with the Gray Recruiting Team. My name is Nicole Karras. I am a talent acquisition specialist. Happy to be with you here tonight alongside my boss, our Vice President of Recruiting, Jennifer Dale. And you guys, we have some very special guests with us here tonight. If you didn't know, we are blessed in Gray to have an executive news training team. And so we have trainers on our team that specialize in different aspects of newsroom skills and talents. And tonight we have with us Kim Wilhelm and Alex Flippen. Thank you both for being with us tonight. And I'll let you both quickly introduce yourselves. Kim, if you want to go first.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for making time for this. I know time is tight, especially as a journalist, so really appreciate you setting aside time to sit in on this tonight. Like Nicole said, we're part of the training team, and our job really is to make you better. So if you are a new journalist coming out of college and this is your first job, we know that can be scary and a little intimidating, or whether you're midway through your career and you're just looking to grow and a new challenge, because that's what we all need, no matter how much experience we have. So our job as trainers is to help you get there, help support your newsrooms. So again, we're really happy to see you tonight. And if there's anything we can do for you or your career, please let us know.
Alex, introduce yourself if you would.
I am Alex Flippen. I'm the executive on-air trainer with Gray News Training. I've been doing this just shy of 20 years, 18, 19 years, something like that. And I love being a part of this training team. I'll talk about it a little bit here in a bit, but I've always kind of been in a training role for most of my career. And so to ultimately move into this role where I'm training so many journalists and meeting so many journalists from really across the country, it's been as much a learning thing for me as it is for all of those people, because I get to see, how they do it everywhere. And it's not just me having to work at different stations to figure all that out. I get to work up close and personal with these journalists. So it's just been a wonderful thing. I love helping people get where they want to go.
We're so thankful to have both of you here with us, and we're thankful to have all of you joining us tonight. If you want to go ahead and drop your location in the chat, please do so we can see who's joining us tonight. And then also have your cell phone out and ready. We're going to have an interactive moment here in just a little bit. But for now, Alex, I'm going to throw it to you for our Insider MMJ training.
All right, fantastic. This is really cool. Hopefully my camera is clear again, so hopefully it'll stay that way. Well, as I said, I've been doing this for quite some time, and today I was asked to talk to y'all about storytelling and characters. And yes, I did say y'all. I'm from the South. You might hear a little bit of that sneaking in every now and then, but for the most part, I do pretty good to kind of keep that non-regional dialect. But it's good that I'm from the South, right? Because we're talking about characters, and we got a lot of characters in the South. So specifically today, we're going to talk about some misconceptions about characters and how to easily start telling stories in news. Then I'm going to boil all those misconceptions out, like, boiling something down in a pot. And what we're going to have is this concentrated, simple 3-item checklist to help start identifying good characters and start storytelling through those characters without any second guessing or overthinking, just the bare essentials to start telling those stories. So like I said, I've been doing this for about probably almost 20 years. And for about 15 of those years, I've been in a training role in some form or another for journalism. And one of the things that I've kind of found universally confusing to people over those years, particularly storytellers who are kind of at the beginning of their TV storytelling career, is how to define the word character as we use it in television news. We say character a lot. We need to talk to characters, but it's kind of tough to tell what a character is when you're new to it. We know we're supposed to use characters and have characters in our stories because our professors and our bosses tell us that we need that. But what is it? And what do we mean by storytelling when we're talking about news? So looking at this slide that we've pulled up here, looking at some of those definitions, the things that jump out at me are book, movie, play, fictional, dramatic. That's why I think the word character is sometimes confusing, is because those all deal with, fictional things. We deal with facts and, hard news stories. So sometimes it's confusing when we hear this definition of character and try to put that into journalism. So I am kind of a journalism nerd. Really, I'm just a nerd. I joke about this a lot, but I am just a nerd. If you looked around my office, you'd see various, Batman toys and If you look closely at the books, you'll see some nerdy stuff back there. But if you put journalism in front of it, it doesn't sound as nerdy. So I'm a journalism nerd. And I rarely have this many people that are all so like-minded about journalism in the same room as me. So I'm going to, if you will indulge me, pick your brain here for a second. And I was gonna, share my screen and do all this, but I don't know if we actually need to do that, because I can just talk about these without you guys having to pull out your phones. I kind of felt bad about making everybody get out their phones, and then she even gave you the disclaimer, but I'm afraid it'll mess up or something. So let's just talk about what I was going to have you do. What I was going to have you do was go through and pick one of 4 definitions that you think describes what a character is in news. And I give you 4 options: a person with a unique personality, a real person, not an official, or someone who is deeply invested in a news story. And the reason I was going to give you only 4 examples or 4 things to choose from is because when I talk to journalists all the time, asking them, what makes a good character? I work with journalists one-on-one. I do coaching sessions. I work in workshops and seminars like this. And so I ask this question a lot. And by and large, the 4 answers I get are a person with a unique personality, a real person, not an official, or someone deeply invested in a story. Right. And so when we look at that first one, someone with a unique personality, that definition is maybe what got a chuckle out of you when I said, I'm from the South. We have characters from the South. Right. I love that guy. He's such a character. And again, I think that's a confusing term. We think, oh, we need a good character in our story to be a character. That's why I think it's a little confusing, especially when you're kind of starting your journey into telling storytelling in news. So a person with unique personality that you see here, they may be a very welcome addition to a particular story, but it doesn't exactly represent what a character is in relation to news and storytelling. A person doesn't have to be some off-the-wall individual, some off-the-wall character to be a character in our news story. And characters shouldn't be considered something that we just use for feature pieces or puff pieces. And that's something I hear a lot when I talk to more experienced journalists that have kind of veterans to the business. They often associate characters with feature stories, feature reporting. They'll immediately start talking about feature reporting when you talk about what makes a good character. And I want you to separate the word character from the term feature reporting. Characters certainly have a place in feature reporting, right? High school coaches that go above and beyond for their, kids or whatever, or, a young, teenager who places in the finals of a national mullet competition, right? I've actually done that story. So those are great off the wall characters, and they're great in feature stories. But finding characters for our day turns, just our normal daily story, that takes that story to a higher, more impactful, more relevant level for our viewers than if we interview people who we don't learn anything about and who don't do anything to inspire our curiosity or inspire the audience's curiosity or spark interest in our audience, right? So moving on to the next slide, some of you answered, or some of the answers I often get is that a real person is not an official. A real person, or a character is not a real person, or excuse me, a character is a real person or not an official, is what I'm trying to say. Kind of the same thing. If you're an official, you're not a real person. And reporters are often told they use way too many officials or guys in ties in their stories. And we want to hear from characters, right? We want to hear from real people. But aren't mayors, cops, and managers real people, right? Aren't they? I mean, I'd like to think that we're all real people. And I bet officials feel the same way. Like here you see this cop eating pizza, smoking a cigarette. Just because he's a law enforcement official doesn't mean that he isn't a real person. So why can't he be a character? You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Here we see the same cop. He's out of uniform. Now all of a sudden he's a real person? No, I think he's always a real person. So why can't an official be a character in our story? They are a real person. So what can we learn from that? Let's just say, what if we say that an official can be a character as long as they're not speaking in an official capacity? So looking at this slide, just as an example, or the next slide rather, for instance, if you want to interview me about a story about, say, the high cost of eggs, right? In that story, I'm a real person. If you want to interview me about a story about the Chiefs prospect in the coming football season, right? I can be the real person, your character in your story. But if you want to interview me about Gray News Training, I'm an official. I'm an official with Gray News Training in that. I'm not a real person, right? So let's see how that works real quick. I'm going to show you a video of 3 clips of interviews. I won't show you the whole story or anything, but it's one man being interviewed. Take a look.
Level weightlifters who want to see the next generation of competitive weightlifters succeed and push them to do their best.
Most of our kids train 4 to 5 days a week. There's 2 disciplines they do: snatch, lift.
Dr. Van Zyl will make a great superintendent, Sneeden told us in an interview today, but the contract was just too costly for him.
The reason I voted no was the salary was too high. We just failed a levy. We're in financial trouble. We just gave raises to the staff.
Walking the dogs is part of Dennis Sneeden's daily routine. What happened on his block this morning was anything but.
So everybody's kind of buckled their hatches down.
Folks on Michigan Avenue would like nothing more.
Well, you're going to get caught, and it could get ugly because these people are real protective of their homes.
So there you go. That was Dennis Sneeden. Among many things, I'm sure, he was the head Olympic coach for women's weightlifting in Beijing back in 2008. He's a school board member of his local school district, and he's a guy who walks his dog and witnessed a crime. In 2 of those interviews, he was what we call an official. And in one, he's what we call a real person, somebody that we could make a character out of, right? He's just a guy who's walking his dog or walks his dog every morning, who was approached by a reporter looking for a witness to interview, right? So if we're making a checklist, move on to the next slide here. If we're making a checklist on how to identify a good character, maybe the first thing we'll write down is that the person we're interviewing is not speaking in an official capacity. Now, we'll talk more about that later, but let's just write that now. Let's keep it on the board as our first little check mark, person who's not speaking in an official capacity. Now, moving on, one of the things that people say is someone who's deeply invested in a topic, the topic of your story, rather. That is what makes a good character, somebody who's deeply invested in that story. Now, again, that's great. Maybe that'll be a super welcome addition to your story, but is it a prerequisite to have a character to a story? I say no. I say not, right? The answer why, let's talk about why we have characters in our stories in the first place. I don't think they have to be deeply involved. Characters are the reason that we watch anything, fiction, nonfiction. They make us care about the story. We want to see how Wolverine and Deadpool end up saving the universe. We want to find out if Clark Griswold is going to get that holiday Christmas bonus and be able to put that pool in because we care about him, right? We want to know if whoever's looking for Nemo finds Nemo. And I put that reference in, but I've never seen the movie, so I don't know if that's right. And I'm not even sure if Nemo's a boy. But anyway, if that's what we want to know if they're going to find Nemo, I think. I don't know. So when we watch those stories, the characters in them, they interest us. It's why we watch the story in the first place, right? They make us curious to know what they're up to. But most importantly, they make us care about the story. They help the viewer connect to the story. So why is that? Well, there's probably many reasons that people might connect to a character in a story, but numerous reasons maybe. But the things we look at are maybe that character is, kind of like the person sitting at home. They're not that different. The audience can relate to that person. They're not that different from them. Or maybe there's just something about the person that sparks the audience's interest. Either way, they make the audience care, and that increases our opportunity to engage the viewer. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but let's just add sparks interest to the list. They spark the audience's interest. That'll help us identify whether we have a good character. So finally, now you can move on to that next slide. Can you explain why this person is being included in your story, right? Let me give you an example. So some sort of juggling street performer appearing in your story would certainly spark interest, but can you make sense to the audience in your track when you're actually writing why you're interviewing this person for this particular story? That goes back to, does a character have to be deeply invested in the topic of your story? And why I say not necessarily. I don't think so. You can find a good character who's not super invested in your story. So let's say you're covering a story This is a real story in the town I'm living in right now. Let's say that we're covering a story about the city trying to determine whether they'll start charging for downtown parking. And that's causing some confusion with residents. They've never charged for it. Now they're going to charge for it. So we go downtown because we're doing this story. We start talking to that juggler. He's a street performer. And we learned that he hasn't heard anything about the proposed parking charge. He does not own a vehicle. So he doesn't even have to park. So can he be a character in our story? So let's look at our checklist. Let's just look at our checklist. Is he speaking in an official capacity? Well, he didn't even know about the parking charge. And he's not the head of some anti-parking charge group or whatever. So no, he's not speaking in official capacity. Does he spark interest in our audience? Well, I don't know. He's a street performing juggler. That's kind of interesting. Let's say, yes, he sparks interest. Can you explain why you're interviewing him for the parking story? I think I can. I think I can utilize this person as a character. Let's look at the next slide. This is an example of the script I might write. Juggling knives looks a lot more dangerous than it is, according to Bruton Gaster. Here's his soundbite. You just have to make sure to catch the handle, not the blade. And while that may seem obvious, something that isn't as clear to Gaster or many in town is if or when the city will begin charging people to park along these downtown streets. And he says, honestly, I didn't even realize they were considering it, right? So we go on to explain the parking issue. Maybe we'd end with another soundbite from Bruton Gaster saying something like, oh, maybe if they're paying for parking, they won't have as much change to throw on my hat or at the end of my performance or something. Maybe we can end with that bite and wrap it up with him. But we used him to get into our story, used his unique experience in his sound bites. I think I was able to explain why we interviewed him for the story, even though he wasn't obviously like overtly invested in the topic. And the audience wasn't left asking, what's that guy doing there? Why would they interview this guy for that? We were able to kind of explain that. And that is where the storytelling begins, right? We always say we want to tell stories to our audience instead of just regurgitate facts at them. And that can be a little confusing too. What do we mean by telling a story, right? This is news. We're supposed to be telling facts and stories, right? So the third point in our slide right there that you're looking at, that third point in our checklist helps us with that. It removes a little bit of that confusion or like second guessing or overthinking in how we begin storytelling. I introduce you to a street performer and I explain that he hasn't heard about the proposed parking charge that's causing confusion. So the simple act of explaining why the juggler is being interviewed was my storytelling jumping off point. Now, the next step, I'll choose some sound bites from that person that give his unique perspective because it's going to help the audience care about it and my story. And we'll get to more on that in a second when we talk about sound bites. Sound bites are an important part of this, so we're going to save it for last. Moving on to the next slide, there is something else that we can add to our list, though, before we talk about sound bites to help us easily figure out how to start telling our story, right? If we struggle to figure out how to begin our storytelling process, let's look at this one here. If we take a moment to shoot B-roll of your character, the person you're interviewing that you're going to make your character, doing something that you can write to, it becomes so much easier. So spend 10 minutes after your interview, it could be before your interview, but spend 10 minutes with the person you're interviewing, shooting B-roll of them. Not 10 shots, not 2 or 3 shots to introduce them. 10 minutes shooting B-roll of them doing something. Then explain what they're doing in that B-roll when you write your package. So here are some examples. Move on to the next slide, and I'll give you some quick examples to make it easy. While people across town enjoyed their morning cup of coffee, Micah Smith sipped his from a thermos 100 feet underground. So that could be a story about maybe a looming miners' strike that's coming up. Maybe this could be a story about the heat wave we've been having and how hot it is for workers out in the real world working up on the surface level. But he's 100 feet and he doesn't have to worry about it. The point is, when I interviewed him, I'm in a mine and he's sipping coffee. So I wrote about what I shot and where I'm interviewing him. It's the beginning into storytelling. Riding a bike is how Gerald Ray gets from home to work and back again each day. Takes him about 15 minutes, but on Highway 11, cars are moving at a snail's pace. So I didn't interview somebody in traffic. I interviewed somebody who was riding a bike and I equated it. I related it back to the traffic problem, but I interviewed a guy who had a bike. So the video I shot of him was going to be him on a bike and him riding a bike. So I wrote about him being on the bike and related it to the story that I'm telling. Easy one here. You wouldn't think that the high price of gas would be on the mind of anyone at this dog park on such a beautiful day, but Mary Wise would beg to differ. Well, I'm guessing that Mary Wise is somebody who's worried about the high price of gas prices. This is a gas price story, but I interviewed Mary at a dog park. So the video I have of Mary is going to be her walking her dog and her at the dog park. So I talk about the dog park when I talk about Mary. So we write about what's happening in that B-roll moment video that we shot, combined with explaining why we interviewed that person for the story in the first place. And now we're telling a story. Now we're storytelling. So I have a great example of just that from a reporter. His name's Nathan Vickers, fantastic storyteller. Some of you probably know him. He's, I believe, working in St. Louis right now. And what we're going to see from him is a typical run-of-the-mill story a million of us would do or have done a million times and will do a million times. It's a run-of-the-mill storm cleanup story, right? It's a big storm came through the night before. This is the next day. So I want you to listen as he tells us what we've talked about. He tells us why he's interviewing these people. He doesn't say, here's why I'm interviewing them. He writes to it. He tells us why he's interviewing these people for the story, and he explains what's happening in that B-roll moment. And one more thing before we play it, I want you to notice the sound bites that he picks to use and what is said in them. You don't have to memorize them or anything, but go ahead and take a look at this video and listen to the sound bites used and everything.
And moved.
An ugly mess is the last thing Carol Hockenberry wants.
Considering I've never had anything like this before, it's pretty traumatic. We got a lot of work to do.
The Merle Norman storefront was one of several in the path of last night's storm.
Well, look at this girl. I mean, come on.
So were dozens of mannequins and high-end wigs.
We have a lot of girls on the floor over there, and we've got some new hairstyles. It's called Windblown.
She's not the only one with a sense of humor.
It was not good.
Laughter is Kevin Accord's only defense for now. There's damage to his law and tax firm, including a tree limb that burst through a window, leaving an office in shambles.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do about Mother Nature. You can always fix everything, right?
Next door, Lenexa crews are clearing debris off the streets.
Could have been a lot worse, that's for sure.
Nick Arena is the city's municipal services director. He says there was damage to some public property, too.
We have a couple parks that have some tree damage as well, and some hangars that we're going to have to take care of at a later time.
But even with the mess, there are still glimpses of beauty.
Maybe a little redder or pinker.
Hockenberry is still helping what customers she can.
She's definitely messed up.
Thankful the hair-raising experience was only a passing storm.
That's good. It'll be fine. We'll get it all together. We'll be fine.
Absolutely love that story. A little bit of the front end got cut off, but it's just that, you know, a storm came through and they were cleaned up. But a lot of reporters would have started and stopped by interviewing that city official who we saw in the middle, just about the cleanup. They would have grabbed some B-roll of some of those fallen limbs, and that chipper shredder would have been some good B-roll. But there wouldn't have been a mention of wigs, no makeup, no accountants. If we were lucky, that reporter would have interviewed those people. We'd get a bite from them about, you know, what damage they had or, you know, how much it was going to cost to fix. But Nathan, on the other hand, introduces us to a main character, even a supporting character, that accountant, right? And explains to us why they are being interviewed for this story and what they are physically doing during that B-roll moment. It kind of seems almost too simple, right? So explaining why the person is being interviewed, in this case, they had storm damage, and what the audience is seeing in the video, the people are sorting through that damage, cleaning up. That in itself, that's a story. You're telling a story. Here's this person. Here's why I'm interviewing them. Here's what they're doing. If you do that, you're storytelling. If you continue on to explain the topic or the issue that you're covering, in this case, aftermath of last night's storm, then you're storytelling a bigger news story through that character. We use that character to get to that bigger overarching story. Here's their experience. Here's the bigger story. And that gets me to my final point, and that is about sound bites that you choose to use from your characters, right? Remember that we want the audience to care about our story and our characters. We want them to be interested. We went through your checklist. You went through your checklist, right, to go pick out your character. You found a character. They checked all three of them. So don't waste your sound bites on an objective fact that anyone can say. If that's the case, you say it. Let the anchor say it, right? Let your characters that you interview talk about their experience, their feelings, their perspective, right? Their unique perspective. In that last story, Nathan chose to use sound bites, if you'll notice, that weren't just objective facts, right? That anyone could tell us, except that one where he says, you know, we have some hangers in the tree or whatever. But all his characters, he didn't use them to say objective facts. He used them to tell about their experience. He chose bites that only that person in that situation could tell us. The Merle Norman store owner, she said her first bite was, considering I've never had anything like this before, it's pretty traumatic. She's the only person who can tell me that, or someone who had their store broken or whatever. No one else can tell me that. It's a unique bite. How much will it cost to fix it? How many stores were damaged? That's not in the sound bites. That's not what the characters and the real people we interview are talking about. I'm sure Nathan might have said it in that package. Maybe he said it in his intro. Maybe the anchor talked about that. But the sound bites from his characters are those characters' thoughts, their feelings, and their opinions. So really, the point of all this is there is no one definition of character. Anyone can be your character. But if you're having some trouble spotting them or knowing what they are or what to do once you find a character, this checklist right here that's on your screen can get you started. Person's not speaking in an official capacity. Person sparks interest. You can explain why they're in your story. See if the person you're interviewing checks each of those boxes. If they do, you're on the right track. Choose sound bites from your characters that aren't just facts. Choose bites that are unique to that person. Then add that fourth step in of spending those 10 minutes shooting video of that person. And when you write your package, explain what the audience is seeing in the video when you write your package. Eventually, you won't need the checklist because remember, and this is important, anyone can be a good character, even an official who you might be interviewing in an official capacity. But don't get hung up on that right now if you're confused. Anyone can be a good character if they make the viewer care about your story. It's really more about the sound bites that you choose from that person and how you utilize them to make the story relevant to your audience. But in the beginning stages of storytelling, if you find yourself a little confused, that checklist is going to get you in the ballpark. It's a real stripped down way to look at it, but it's a base that you can build on to tell impactful, meaningful stories in your communities. That is it for me. That is it for characters and storytelling. Thank you guys for listening. I'm happy to take questions.
I think that was a great overview of characters and storytelling, and I really hope you guys can use some of these tips. What I like to do when I have something kind of new in a holster is to put it on a Post-it and put it on the monitor on my computer.
I do that too.
Do you do that too?
I do the same thing.
Because then you can't ignore it. It's right in front of you
right
as
there.
you're making your calls, as you're setting up your story. So I love that. I'll throw a question out to you, Alex, while we're waiting for some questions in the chat here. And please don't be shy. This is an opportunity to ask Alex anything. Ooh, that could be another live segment sometime.
We'll do a new one.
Alex, anything.
Hey.
Does a character have to be a person?
No, I don't think a character has to be a person. And I almost, put that in the presentation. Talking about characters today, I made the reference that, a character could be a dog. I mean, I've done a story where the character was a duck. The reason I don't really harp on that is because we're talking about the sound bites we choose. And obviously you're not going to take too many sound bites from a duck or a dog, but they can be
unique perspective.
It'd be a neat perspective. It'd be a tough package to turn, I think. But, the character, what a character truly is someone that makes us, or something, I guess, that makes us care about the story, that relates it to us, that lets us connect to it. And by us, I mean the audience. We need the audience to care about our stories. We worked all day for these stories. We went into editorial meetings and we picked the most important stories to tell that day to our communities. And so we want to be able to, one, tell the story through the community, and two, we want the people who are at home seeing this to be able to say, okay, this is interesting to me. This does relate to me in some way. I relate to this in some way. I need to watch this story. It's an important story. I worked all day. I really want you to care about it.
I love it. One of my favorite stories. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
No, nothing. No, go ahead. I had a question that I hear a lot that I suspect Alex will know the answer to.
So
I just want to share a quick thing about characters not being people. Is there was a story, and I know it lives in the World Wide Web, if nobody calls it that, about a tree. And it's called the Magic Tree, and it's in mid-Missouri. And this is during my time when I was at Mizzou. And the Magic Tree was always decorated in lights, and it was a form of therapy for the guy who owned the tree. So now we have, like the story we had where we had kind of the supporting character with the accountant, but we had the salon owner as the main character. In this case, it was almost like the tree was the main character and the guy was the supporting character. It really could have been written either way.
Right.
But the way I felt when watching it from the outside looking in is I felt the tree was almost the main character of the story. And it was just really well done, using a play on words, the cursive of chords, the penmanship, and in different colored lights or ink. And it was really great story that if you have a chance to check out, just look up Magic Tree in Missouri and you'll find it. Okay, Jennifer, I'm sorry, you can ask your question.
Well, actually, this is a question we got into the chat. I do want to answer mine later. But in a beginner newsroom where there have 2 or 3 stories, what's the best way to get to the characters when they're time limited?
Great question.
So how do you find a character on a deadline?
It's a great question because we're always going to be on that time limit, right? We're always going to have that deadline. And that's another reason that when we talk about characters and using the term character, it seems to me, I don't know, to me, what I see is character is a daunting thing to find, right? It's like, oh gosh, how am I going to find my characters? So many reporters think, oh, I can't do my story because I can't find anybody immediately impacted by this or directly impacted by it, and that's not necessarily the case. We can tell the story through almost anyone. Almost anyone can be our character. What makes the character for us is how we utilize them in our story. So again, going back to the juggler story, the guy juggling knives, he has nothing to do with the story. He has nothing to do with the story. In the end, I find some way to tie it back perhaps, but he's just a way for me to tell the story through this person. I introduce you to him and kind of explain to you why I'm here and why he's here. And then we go into the problem. So the questions that I ask that interview, that knife juggler, what I ask him is not going to be about facts. It's not going to be about, I might need to know some from him, but when I get those unique sound bites from him where he goes, I didn't even know they were doing this. And I say, oh, okay, well, I can use that because that's part of it. A lot of people don't know this is going on, or a lot of people think that this is, a confusing thing that's going on. I use their experience, whether it's that they have no experience with it or whether it's that they have great experience with it. And then I ask them questions that will elicit those unique sound bites. So I don't just say, what time did you get here? And I don't just say, how long will this take? I say, if I say, how long does this take? And they say 4 hours, I say, why does it take 4 hours? Right? Because you can't answer, why does it take 4 hours with a quick, soundbite? You have to explain. And in those moments of explanation are where people give you those unique sound bites that are just about them. And that is how you find your characters. Your characters are already there. They're the people you're interviewing right now for your story that you just ran and grabbed. But then spend a little time. If you can't spend 10 minutes with them, I understand some of us are on deadlines, but spend enough time with them that you can talk about what they're doing when you interview them. It just makes storytelling a little easier. But finding your characters is just finding the person you interviewed and then making them your character with those unique sound bites.
And especially on time crunch, Alex, I feel like this is just a great example of why the question comes up in story meetings from assignment managers and news directors all the time is, who does this impact? And who will this impact and why does it matter? And if you're able to answer that question in the story pitch, even if it's like, we'll use city council as a great example, right? Because city council meetings are at what time? Usually maybe 3 hours, 4 hours if they're generous before deadline for a 10 p.m. newscast.
Sure.
But if you can go through the agenda and you can kind of pinpoint who this is going to impact and do a little legwork ahead of time, it's going to make your life so much easier and make those characters faster to find. But you're right. It's already people that, and a lot of times you're already talking to.
Yeah, it's just it's the questions you ask them, it's the things they say, and then it's what you include that they say in your package. It's something that interests the audience, that sparks their interest, that makes them care about the story, that makes them relate to this person. That's how we're finding those characters. Although if you want to do one of these on time management and working a day ahead, that is a whole nother one, because working a day ahead,
actually
that's
that
the
came
key.
up yesterday. It was a suggestion from someone. I think it may have been one of our news directors, that we do one on time management, because yes, it was in office hours yesterday. That's what it was. And I said, you know what? I said, we probably need to talk about that, because I always told my team, it was help future you. Make one call today that will help future you tomorrow. You'll be thankful for it. So the question I had is something that I suspect anyone who's working as a reporter who's listening to this right now has run into. I've got to cover city council. How do I handle that with B-roll, and where do I find my character when I'm covering city council?
Nicole already answered your question on this one.
She did.
Because you got to look ahead and you see what those issues are and what you're going to want to cover when you're there, right? And then you go to that neighborhood, or you go to that store, or whatever is concerning that point, and that's where you find your characters, out where they actually live and where they actually are. Of course, you can interview people at the meeting, and that's fantastic. But if we're doing a city council story about people upset about a new business that's going into their neighborhood, then we need to go out to that neighborhood. That's where the compelling B-roll is. That's where the compelling people are. And so we do that by looking ahead, of course. So Nicole stole
what
my
I'm
answer.
hearing is that the story is never the meeting. Ever. The story is never the meeting. The story is
I think you have an agenda with this question, but yes, the story is never the meeting.
Just put yes. I hate meetings. Like, the agendas can be your friend, but the people sitting on chairs at meetings and shaking.
Yes, B-roll of meetings does not spark anyone's interest or make anyone care about a story.
So let's see. Here's one from Alexander. Hold up, this should be popping up. There we go. What advice would you give to someone like me trying to start out to find a good characters for my stories? Is that a tough process for someone working in the business?
No. Again, I think that characters themselves are what you make them, right? Like Nicole said, a tree can be your character. If I go and I'm interviewing someone about this tree, if I choose to use sound bites that are, yes, it's an oak tree. Oak trees usually live 100 years and they get this tall and they're this big around. That's nothing unique. That's something I can look up on Wikipedia. That is something you can look up. I can say it, you can say it, right? The story is about this tree. I want to evoke emotion. I want to make my audience care about this and relate to this. So I'm going to ask questions and use sound bites about what the tree means to them and why do they think it's beautiful and why is it important. That's where the character comes from, is once we find this person who's just speaking about their unique experience, who's just speaking about their opinion or whatever it is that only they can tell us, that's where the character comes from. So you can pop in a barber shop and find a character. You can, go to the, fast food restaurant down the street and get somebody coming out of the, drive-through lane. These are your characters if you spend a little time with them and ask them some questions that can give us these unique bites. And again, as long as we're talking, I do want to say, I don't want to say that an official can't be a character. I said it several times, an official can. But I put that first check mark in there, that first checklist of, are they speaking in an official capacity? Because chances are, if you're talking to a police chief about something a police chief can tell you, he's probably not being used as the character in your story. He's probably not going to tell you how he feels emotionally about this or what his opinion is on this. Maybe he will, and he can be your character. But the reason we put the check mark up there is just because we want to say, well, if they are speaking in official capacity, you may be having trouble finding a character. You may have trouble finding your sound. If they are not, then maybe they will give you more unique experience. Maybe they will talk more off the cuff and more like a real person. And that's where we find those characters, Alexander, is in those sound bites in the time we spend with them.
Okay, here's one. Thank you for taking the time to teach us tonight. Do you think a package is ever acceptable for air without a character?
Yes, I do. I mean, I absolutely do, because in the end, what we do is the news business. What we do is urgent. What we do is important. So if we need to get information out to people, then we have to get information out to people. And there are plenty of stories that are going to be breaking news and just things that have to be covered and things that have to be conveyed quickly, or just conveyed, period, that are very mechanical. And, you know, you're not going to find a character there. So yes, I mean, a package without a character is definitely acceptable. You know, hands down, it's acceptable. It would be great if it could have one, but, you know, not all stories are going to have that. And, you know, probably not all stories would benefit with it. I don't want to talk to the juggler downtown when I'm talking about evacuating during a forest fire. You know, I mean, that is just about the forest fire. Let's get on out of here.
I think a good example of that, and we've probably heard this term in our newsrooms, are nuts and bolts pieces. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you'll have this like in team coverage situations where there's a reporter who's focused on the impact, and then there's a reporter focused on the facts, the mechanical piece of it, you know, as you mentioned, Alex. And I think that in those situations, yeah, you know, sometimes finding a character is difficult because it's all about the information and the facts. Those stories, P.S., are not as fun to do. So if you get an option between the nuts and bolts and the people, take the people. That's way more fun to report on.
Absolutely. And, you know, writing about nuts and bolts is never as fun either, right? You can't be, you don't have as great a time writing about it.
You know, talking about emotional sound bites, how do I effectively write around them while telling the facts of the story? Sometimes I get a really good interview with great sound bites, but I struggle to write around them. Any tips for that?
You know, I spent the last 15 years as an investigative reporter, and a lot of what you cover as an investigative reporter is very, very sad. You know, I will even say, particularly some of the last stories I was covering prior to, you know, taking this training role, it was as if they had saved all the real sad ones for the end, you know? And so I had these very compelling, strong sound bites from family members who were affected by the death of a family member or some other scam or atrocity that had happened to them. And you have these amazing sound bites that sometimes are tough to write to because, you know, what we want is we want our people at home to relate to our characters, right? We want them to relate to these people. And sometimes it's hard to find yourself in those shoes. Like we always say, you never think it will happen to us, right? So when we're writing about tornado damage and we're writing about murders and we're writing about these things, sometimes it's hard to get to those good bites, those good, strong emotional bites, because we do have to get the facts in there, because that's what we're going to elicit some of the emotion from you. Because when you hear about this crime and you hear about, you know, the facts of it that amaze you, I'll use this super yacht story. Kim and I have talked about it several times today. This super yacht sank, and there's, you know, these rich people on board that were lost in the super yacht. But then you find out there's this side story about this business partner of his that was killed 2 days earlier in a car wreck that's unrelated. It's a lot of information, and it's very compelling information. And so maybe sometimes the information becomes a little bit more compelling than sometimes the sound bites are that you're finding a tough time to write to. I only use this as an example because sometimes it's hard to relate to somebody who's lost a child or lost a mother or something if you've never done that. Many of us have not, thank goodness, right? And so sometimes those bites don't necessarily, they might make you care at home, but it's harder to grasp. It seems more of a story than it is a reality. So sometimes the facts and the reality are actually what we need to focus on to elicit that emotion. I hope that answered that question. It was kind of the roundabout way to get there.
I would just add too, you know, one of the bigger mistakes that I made as a young reporter is I got in the way of the emotional sound bites. And part of that happens in the interview process, right? Is when you feel, it feels very, what do I want to say? Sterile. You have a list of questions, you know, you need to get through this list of questions. And you're not really listening because you're so focused on getting your answers. You're an MMJ, you're worried about your mic, you're worried about your camera, you're worried about all these things you have to worry about as an MMJ. But being able in the interview process to just let this person show the emotion and let it breathe, and then have that reflect in your story. The best stories, when you've got this emotional sound, have less of you and more of them. And if your track is outweighing your sound bites, then maybe take another look at it and see if there's a way that you can cut back on what you're saying, and maybe that naturally helps those emotional sound bites sing a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not sure, I'm not sure exactly what you mean when you say you struggle to write around them or write to them, or whatever you said there. So I don't know exactly what you mean. If maybe you're having trouble setting up these emotional bites or these great bites or whatever. And Nicole makes a good point. Sometimes taking away your track and letting them do it, and maybe adding a little bit of clarification sometimes to something they say, when they say, this is the worst thing that happened to me since my last tragedy. And then you can have a tiny bite that goes, she lost her other child 10 years earlier. Then let her keep talking. Let her continue on with another bite, because, sometimes we do get in the way, as you said. I mean, I can tell you a million times that I've stepped on people's emotional sound bites because I wanted to get to that next question.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized too late. Now I've ruined the sound bite and I've ruined that emotional moment. So sometimes less you is good. Sometimes a little clarification from you is good to help push those bites along, I think.
I want to ask about structure of a story, because, I think the longer you do this, you kind of almost come up with your own little formula. If you could think of a formula that you typically follow when you build a story with characters, Alex, what is the structure? What does that formula look like?
I mean, if there was a formula, if there was a template, which I certainly would say there's not, I don't think there's a template to a right story. I don't think there's a template to a wrong story. I mean, I'm sure there's a really wrong way to tell a story, and there's a best way maybe. But I really think that, I think every story is its own story and can be handled differently. But, for sake of this, the examples I used a lot through there, what you saw Nathan do, what I kind of hinted that I would have done with the juggler parking story, is just start with a character, start with that character, introduce us to that character, tell us why you're talking to them, tell us what they're doing, and then go in to explain the conflict of the story, whatever we're talking about. They're trying to pay for parking, but people are confused. Or they're trying to charge for parking, but people are confused. Or they're cleaning up this storm and there's still a lot to do. Whatever the main part of the story is, we move on to that. We can talk to some officials. But then I do like to come back to my first character. And lots of reporters like to come back to that first character just to kind of wrap it in a tidy little bow. And because we've learned about the problem now, we remember the character, we've learned about the problem, and now we end with the character that somehow kind of wraps it up. To say, I think with the knife juggling parking story, which I know is ridiculous when you say it that many times out loud. But, we might have wrapped it up by saying, he might have not known about it before, but, now that he does, he's wondering if, people paying for parking will mean less change at the end of his performances or whatever it is. I find a clever way to wrap it in that nice bow. So I do like to start with a character and end with a character, hit officials in the middle, but that is by no means a template. That is just one way to do it.
I think some of the best stories break that template too. Think about some of the more powerful newscasts you watch. You break the template, you break the rundown. That's something that producers are encouraged to do all the time. So as a reporter, why wouldn't you be encouraged to try that too? Maybe knife juggling is a great reason to break a story structure. It's certainly a crazy story. Why a knife juggler is talking about parking.
Right.
We're going to start to wrap this up, guys. So if you have any last minute questions that you have for Alex, please drop those in the chat. I want to welcome Kim to chat a little bit about the executive training team that we have with Gray and what you all do for our employees.
Thanks, Nicole. We do training on all different platforms and levels. So we do virtual training when you're coming straight out of school and you're in your first newsroom. That's really for entry-level people. Just as I mentioned before, we know that's scary and you want to succeed, right? You don't want to fail at your first job. And so we're really there to support you in your own newsroom and to help the great training that you're already getting at the station that you're at. We also do in-person workshops. So that's a more advanced level training, but our team travels around to different gray stations all around the country, and we put on regional training seminars. So those are a couple days long. It's really hands-on. We truly believe that, not only teaching, so not only just sitting there listening to somebody do a presentation, but you actually get a chance to try it and repeat it. I know that's how I learn. I'm a good visual learner, I think, but I need to actually do something to feel like I could do it on my own again and again. And as we all know, a lot of the job is just repetition. The package that you do on the first day at your station will look way different than the package you do a year later and 5 years later and 10 years later. So that repetition really builds skills and builds your career. We also have an on-demand library. So our trainers, Alex, Sarah, and Vincent, those are our other trainers on the team. They produce videos and they're very short. They're like YouTube. So, how to white balance my camera. You can learn that in 2 minutes because we know you're busy. We know there's not a lot of time sometimes for training. And so we have this whole huge library of videos that we are constantly adding to that are very skill-based. So if you're just curious how to do something, for instance, we just added a new one on how to transfer video from your cell phone into your editor that is real short. It's, I think, 1:30. So again, these are supposed to be fun. As you could tell, Alex is a fun guy, and we try to make them entertaining so that when you're training, you're not like, oh, this is so boring. But really, again, we're just here for you. So we're excited to support you. We love meeting all of our journalists. And if there's anything we can do for you here in Gray, please let us know.
Awesome. We're lucky to have you guys, and we get asked a lot, when we're visiting schools and when we're doing, outreach, what kind of training do you have and what support do you have for me to continue to grow as a journalist? And, in addition to the onboard training you get, in addition to the mentors that just naturally exist in your newsrooms, we have you all too. So very grateful for you. I know there are folks at our home station here in KCRG and Cedar Rapids that have gone to those trainings and have really benefited from them and speak highly of them. So thank you all. Do we want to take one more quick question, Alex, because I did invite questions.
Sure.
I feel like we've got to address the questions.
No, that's
All right.
a lot.
This one, I've been struggling to get people to be the MOS of my story. They want to avoid the camera. How do you convince people to tell their story?
For anybody that's here and doesn't know what MOS is, it stands for Man on the Street. It's just going and talking to some rando on the street, usually about something. You're getting some opinion. Man on the Street interviews are probably the bane of my existence. I mean, I hated them because you're certainly not spending time with them. You're not spending B-roll moments. You're not getting to know them. This is just stop. What do you think about this? And you get a few quick sound bites from somebody. And generally people, I would say more than not say, oh, no, thank you. That's what they'll say. Can I interview? No, thank you. I like that they say thank you. But I have a few tricks on this. One, of course, persistence, right? The next one is I like to tell those people that to explain to them, if they'll sit there and listen to me, I usually explain to them that no one at home cares what I think about this story. And I can't tell you anyway. No one at home cares what the chief of police thinks. No one at home, they care what real people think. The real people at home, people like them, what do they think about this? And so unless you tell me, people won't know. I talk about that a lot. Something I found later in my career, which is kind of a sneaky trick. Not sneaky trick. That's probably the wrong way to say it. It's a silly thing that works. But I used to tell people, I'll put the camera back there. I'll zoom in on us. I'll zoom in on you. The camera won't even be close. And sometimes that would make people do it. Like they just didn't want the camera close to them. And so one time I went out to shoot stories and I must have asked for 1 million different MOS videos in this town. And it was a good story about the town and nobody wanted to talk. And so then, desperate, I said, well, I won't even use the big camera. I'll just use my phone. And when I said that, everyone said yes. Every single person I asked after that said yes. It was very weird. Now, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have told you to do this. But, I've got a new Google Pixel. You've got a nice iPhone, probably. I hate iPhones. But regardless, the cameras are really, really nice. On iPhones, they're really nice. On any cell phone you have, you probably have a pretty good camera. So one of the things we often suggest in training is getting a little wireless lavalier microphone for your phone. One that's made for your phone. They usually cost about $20, a little less than $20. They're pretty cheap. They work really well. And, 5-10 years ago, I would have said, no, don't use your phone. Now I say, if it will allow you to get beautiful video and good audio of a real person telling me this story, give it a shot. I know it sounds silly, and it maybe wouldn't be something I wrote in some book I wrote about journalism, but I will say that from that point on, I used that all the time, and it worked all the time. I just carried one of those. I don't have one here on my desk, but you've seen them, those little bendy tripods you get at Dollar Tree for literally $1.25. I started carrying those, and I could just set it on a shelf beside me or whatever. MOS was no longer a problem at all if I said, oh, I'll just use my phone. I don't know why, but weird answer, but I'm glad it got asked. So
Yeah, that's a great tip.
I mean, I wouldn't have ever thought about that. I was
desperate.
And photographers would, want to hurt me if I ever tried to pull out my phone for shooting a story. But you're right, the quality's improved, and if it makes people, I mean, how many times do we take selfies, and we're just used to having this instead of a giant, lens, which can be intimidating.
It's intimidating. It's a little intimidating. It feels like I'm being interviewed for the news. But if I'm just like, oh, I'll just ask you some questions, and I'm just my normal self, I'm very, I don't want to say unprofessional. I'm very normal. I'm professional, but I'm just very, I don't try to sound like I'm being smarter than I am or newsier than I am. I just talk to them like I am right now with all of you. And I say, oh, we'll just have a conversation, and that's usually what I use is, oh, we're already doing it. I just hit record. This is it right here. That's usually how I get my MOS. But once I found that cell phone trick, I'm telling you, it works. It worked every time for me after that. It never failed. It really, truly didn't.
Love it. Well, we wouldn't be good recruiters, Jennifer, if we didn't talk about the Gray talent pool. Do you want to give us the spiel?
Absolutely. So for those of you that are Gray employees, you may be familiar with the talent pool, but for those of you that aren't, this is kind of a network site for people who might be interested in working for our company, if not now, because you're under contract, maybe one day. So this is, you can upload a profile to the Gray talent pool, upload your reel, your resume. And this is where it gets kind of cool. You can upload every location that you're interested in working in and every job you're interested in. Let's say you're an MMJ, but you think that one day you might want to be a weekend anchor or maybe an investigative reporter. You can put all of those things in with Gray Talent Pool and put in your availability date. And so like, hey, Jennifer, my contract's not up for another year. That's fine. So, but if you go ahead and fill out your Gray Talent profile, it allows people, let's say you put that your dream market is, I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Well, you can put in that, that you would love to work in Charleston, South Carolina, or maybe, or Savannah. You can put both of those in. And that way, with the end of your contract, is to say the news director in Charleston can be like, hey, I need a weekend anchor who's available in October of 2025. Who wants to come here? Well, they find your profile. You guys could go ahead and start talking. It's also a way on the recruiting team for us to know that what you are looking for and what we can do. This is the single largest hiring spot for our company. I think it's been about 3 weeks since I have looked at the hiring numbers for it, but over 600 people have been hired in the Gray Talent Pool since we started. This is my tip of the day is you can also put in your salary, put competitive market salary, because you don't want to oversell yourself. You don't want to undersell yourself. But again, you can find this on grayishiring.com. Also on grayishiring.com, you can find all of our virtual events that we have coming up. Next month, we're going to do covering politics. I think you might have heard that there's an election. I think it's in November. You might have, I don't know, maybe. It's kind of a big deal, but we have a lot of newbies who aren't quite sure where to start with covering politics. So join us in September to try to get a head start before you get your assigned races in November. And then today we planned out the rest of the year. So we're really excited about what we have coming up. So stick with us. We hope that these are useful to you. And
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that a rising tide lifts all boats. For those of you that are gray employees, we are thrilled that you want to spend extra time with us and learn from our executive training team. For those of you that are not gray employees, well, we'll take care of that soon enough.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Alex, Kim, thank you so much for being with us. Alex, especially thank you for your wisdom in finding characters and in better storytelling. Everybody make your Post-its of your check sheet.
That's
Put them on
right.
your monitor.
Right there.
Use them tomorrow.
Use the
I love
phone, man. It makes me, it really bothers me that I didn't, of course, technology wasn't there back when I was out getting MOSs. But I'm like, that's a great tip.
Whatever
Yeah.
works for you, make it happen. And thanks again, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.